Telephone, water, electricity and gas. Ordinary parts of ordinary life.
But the last 10 years have witnessed a quite extraordinary upheaval in the supply of our basic and essential services. On this side of the tap, meter or socket, the product is still the same. But on the other side, amongst the suppliers, there's been something of a revolution. What were once public assets are now private property. What was once ours is now theirs.
Labour will now have a majority over all parties in a House of 640.
August 1945. A different time, a different attitude. Exhausted but victorious, the people of Britain wanted a new beginning. They found it in the Labour Party, electing them to government and securing Clement Attlee's vision to bring key industries under state control. Top of the agenda, the power supply, and essential operations like the national grid were paraded as the pride of a nation's collective assets.
3 years will see a new national power system and the end of power cuts.
Central then to the concept of nationalisation, the idea of public service.
It will be 12, 30 and 50 seconds.
And for the next 35 years, utilities were supplied by single state-owned companies. No profiteering, in fact, no profit, and supposedly supplies for all at reasonable cost.
This is the personal service still available behind the rattle and buzz of the switches.
But a generation later, the ideal was crumbling. Critics pointed to endemic strike action as a symptom of a wider decline. They claimed the industries had become sluggish and inefficient.
Her Majesty, the Queen, has asked me to form a new administration, and I have accepted.
In 1979, Margaret Thatcher moved from Finchley to Downing Street. She had a tight grip on the House of Commons and a mission to prise open the state-owned monoliths. With her, a team of like-minded and ambitious ministers, all eyeing hungrily the nationalised industries.
They were chronically overmanned, underinvested, and as a result, not nearly as efficient as they were capable of being. Just to take a very simple example, and the combined losses of the nationalised industries total £40,000 million. When I went into government in the Department of Trade in '79, with John Nott as Secretary of State and Norman Tebbit as the Under-Secretary in charge of aviation, our burning ambition was to be the first government department to get a privatisation measure on the statute book.
And he did, with British Airways, though it took 7 years for the actual sale to take off. Meanwhile, Parkinson soon found himself occupied with much bigger quarry.
The first of the utilities to come up for grabs was British Telecom in 1984. Come and get it, said the government, and we did, in droves.
The government had given up 51% of its stake to the marketplace, and popular capitalism was born. For the first time, the British public got a sense of what it was like to play the stock markets, and stagging, selling on for a quick profit, became a household word.
Are you expecting to sell very quickly on the first day?
Yes.
Shares rocketed in value overnight, and with the subsequent privatisations of gas, water and electricity, the story was the same. It was boom time. Everybody could win. All you had to do was join in. There were other winners too. Smiles appeared on the faces of utility executives as they saw their civil service bread and butter salaries transformed into the caviar league. Salaries doubled and trebled, and with generous share option schemes, some executives looked to be on their way to millionaires' row. The salary increases caused a storm at the time and are still clearly a sensitive subject. None of the lucky recipients we approached would speak to us about their pay. But the utilities were out of the trap anyway, set free, we were told, by privatisation. The gold rush over, they would become, the pundits said, leaner and fitter industries driven to excellence by the disciplines of the commercial marketplace and the rigours of competition. The race for your custom was on. But now the first lap is over and the dust has settled, who's really winning?
So far, I think a lot of consumers are very concerned at the level of profits that there have been in these industries and are wondering whether the balance is actually right between what the consumers have got out of privatisation and regulation on the one hand and what shareholders and the companies have got out of it on the other hand.
I think the clearest cases of benefits are to the managers and senior executives of the companies concerned who have seen very large salary increases for doing basically a similar job, not identical jobs, but a similar job. Secondly, successful investors, new shareholders who saw the share price go up. One then comes to the important people, people like you and me, taxpayers and consumers, and there I think the jury is still out.
Not at the Adam Smith Institute, the free market think tank which supplied the intellectual impetus to the privatisation revolution. Dr. Mazdan Piri is in no doubt.
There is absolutely no question that the consumer has been the main beneficiary of privatisation in Britain. They have a better and more efficient service, and they very often have more choices. They have an industry, in each case, which promotes technology more rapidly than its predecessor did, which brings them new kinds of services and opportunities, many more than they had before. Overwhelmingly, the consumer has gained.
Prices have not risen as fast as inflation for gas and telecom. Service standards in all utilities have risen, but the consumers are still not happy.
Good afternoon, Gas Consumers Council. Could I ask you to tell me briefly what the problem is, please, Mrs. Swan?
In fact, we're complaining louder than ever. Last year, the number of complaints about the water companies rose 130%. Electricity complaints were up 19%, and BT was the subject of over 12,000 complaints, as against 4,000 back in 1985. Only British Gas complaints have declined since privatisation.
The one thing behind the high level of consumer complaints is the nagging feeling that whatever the consumer has gained, it's nothing compared to what the shareholders and executives have gained. People are infuriated by the massive utility profits and salaries as they struggle to pay their bills. This is a new resentment. Paying a nationalised industry for a public service is one thing. Swelling the profits of a private monopoly is quite another.
This resentment about monopoly profits is at its strongest among a group of people in a rather different situation. They live in Bolventor in Cornwall, the setting for Daphne du Maurier's novel Jamaica Inn.
On either side of the road, the country stretched interminably into space. No trees, no lanes, no cluster of cottages or hamlets, but mile upon mile of bleak moorland, dark and untraversed, rolling like a desert land to some unseen horizon. No human being could live in this country.
Tourists now gather at the door of Jamaica Inn. Beyond the hearth, there's a welcome refuge from the bleak landscape. There is a scattering of inhabitants around the inn these days, though half of them live in a perpetual state of disconnection. They have no mains electricity, and they're not happy about it.
I think the easiest way anyone could find out what it is like to not have mains electricity is just to throw the main fuse box on their electric supply for 18 hours a day. Everything goes out.
The generator only produces 1,500 watts, so you can't run a kettle, you can't run a toaster, you can't have an immersion heater. You have to turn the lights off when you hoover, you have to turn the lights off when you iron. And so you're severely restricted, only being able to use one thing at a time.
The Matthews and 20 of their neighbours have no electricity because they can't afford. The supplier, Sweb, wants to charge between £6,000 and £33,000 per household. They say it's so expensive because the community is so remote. But you can understand the anger of the Bolventians when they see less isolated neighbours being charged around £230 for connection. In the last years of nationalisation, rural areas could still get subsidies from the state-owned supplier. In 1987, the people of Bolventor were offered connection at half price, but they couldn't raise the money in time. Since privatisation, their hopes have dimmed further. No longer state-owned, Sweb is not keen to spend its own money on subsidies, so the Bolventians must pay the full cost of connection.
If you take British Telecom, which was another privatised industry, the connection charges for a telephone, irrespective of where you live, irrespective of how much money it costs, how many poles they use, how much labour is used, has just been reduced from around £150 to £90 anywhere in the country. So why can't the electricity boards connect people throughout the country at an equal price?
SWEB say they're prevented from reducing the connection charge by the terms of their licence. But Offa, the electricity regulator, thinks otherwise. It says companies are not explicitly precluded from reducing charges in remote rural areas. There is, it seems, another reason for the huge charges.
Not all of our customers, and probably not all of our shareholders, actually want us to use customers' money or company money in providing electricity for a particular group of people.
SWEB's profits rose 36% over the last 2 years, and last year they paid out £21 million in dividends. Mike and Pauline find it hard to reconcile their situation with this apparently available company money.
There's no doubt that because of your situation, installation is very expensive for you, and it's something that SWEB say they don't want to put on to the costs of the rest of the consumers.
Well, then they could use some of their other funds. They could quite simply use their promotional funds.
They could stop spending over £1 million a year on advertising.
If you looked at some of their sponsorship deals, for example, the one of the rugby clubs, which they gave them £130,000, that would wire up this area.
Well, sponsorship is something we undertake for a number of reasons. We may want to give support to organisations in the area who need it, or we may want to do it for commercial reasons, and that is the case with Bath Rugby Club. We want to promote our company logo, our company image, and the various products that we sell, and we do that through the success of Bath Rugby Club.
So while SWEB, new entrants to the commercial marketplace, spend their £130,000 on this, the Matthews and their neighbours, and indeed the 2,000 households in the rest of the southwest without electricity, will either have to stump up the cash or fire up the generator. So which is more important, the shareholder or the consumer?
A balance has to be struck here. We have to protect the interests of both the customer and the shareholder. We have a duty to do that, but it is quite clear that if we didn't have any shareholders, we wouldn't have any company.
The harsh light of economic reality is shining on SWEB, and in Bolventa they seem to have put the concerns of their shareholders before any notion of public service. It just doesn't make commercial sense for them to give the Matthews and their neighbours exactly what they want. But what about the rest of us who don't live in isolated villages? Privatisation was supposed to bring great benefits, like accountability, choice, competition. Have those things really happened? Join us after the break.
With a new 1.6 16-valve engine, side impact bars, and a new body, it's the shape to be in. The new 16-valve Escorts.
Morton 2, Hamilton 2, Berwick 2, Albion 2.
I want to be rich. I want to be very, very, very rich.
E54, Forfar 5.
Come on, just one more.
Cowdenbeath 2, Alloa 2.
Yes, yes, I want to be a millionaire. Right, where's the champagne?
Clyde 3, Brecon 3.
What?
Dumbarton 2, East Stirling 2.
I just want to be wealthy, then just ordinary wealthy.
Stranraer 1, Queen's Park 1.
Oh, well, that's it then.
Stenhousemuir 1, Arbroath 7.
Well, lucky old Arbroath.
If you want to get richer slowly, but surely, you'll want a with-profit savings plan from Prudential.
Ah, the great British public, Star Trekkers, Elvis impersonators, pet pig keepers, all doing what they do with a light Cadbury's whisper. Whatever you do, keep doing it with a whisper.
Cantonese beef, made simple by Sharwood's. Slice the beef and peppers. Stir-fry the beef, add the vegetables. Add Sharwood's black bean sauce, coating the ingredients evenly. Finally, serve with noodles. The mystery of Chinese cooking, unraveled by Sharwood's.
Oh, cherry jam on a bed of sponge cake under a blanket of white chocolate. Come too mouthy.
Jacob's Pims, because that beg to be bit.
My husband, 2 left feet, I'm afraid. Left him at home with a can of beans.
Olé! Hello, another trophy.
There you go.
Boneless leg of lamb glazed with red currant and mint.
We all have to begin somewhere.
Even a ballroom widower can do that. Slam in the lamb.
For a new way to the new Ford Escort, phone free for your options prospectus on 0800 111 222.
To the consumer, the most important benefit of privatisation was to be the introduction of competition.
If people can choose to get their supply from another company, then one company faces the possibility of losing all of its trade to another and going bankrupt. Governments do not generally go bankrupt, and therefore neither do the nationalised industries they control. And the absence of that fear of bankruptcy is one of the things that makes state corporations so inefficient.
That sounds like a fine theory, but there's still not much choice for the domestic consumer. For them, gas, electricity and water are still supplied by monopolies, which means that for those utilities, if you don't like what's on offer, tough luck.
If you put your hand over a modern microphone, people still hear what you're saying.
There does appear, however, to be competition in the telecommunications market. You don't have to buy your phone from British Telecom. You can buy it from any number of other manufacturers. And you could plug it into Mercury instead of BT at home or in public. But how much choice does that really give you?
We don't feel that there is actually real competition in the telephone market. What's actually happened, if you like, is the market's become segmented rather than that there's real competition. The new entrants into the telephone market, for whatever reason, are really competing for the large business users, the large commercial users.
An opinion that is borne out by the fact that of the 23 million domestic telephone users, only 150,000 use Mercury. It all takes time, so we're told. Privatise first, then bring in competition later. And so we have to wait for the luxury of choice, the ability to vote with our feet, and the power to actually influence suppliers. And while we wait, we're at the mercy of the private monopolies. But it has to be said, we're not entirely defenceless. There is a St. George, or a number of them in fact, who, so the theory goes, will defend us against a roasting from the corporate dragons. The knights in shining armour are the 4 regulators: Oftel, Ofgas, Ofwat and Offer, one for each utility. Their honour hangs on protecting the domestic consumers from the monopolistic excesses of the 4 suppliers. They make sure that just because we have no choice, we don't get ripped off. This man is a regulator. In the last 4 years, he's reduced the annual number of gas disconnections by 2/3. In the last 4 months, he's persuaded British Gas to reduce their prices by 5%. In doing all this, Sir James McKinnon has ruffled a few corporate feathers and has gained a reputation for toughness. British Gas certainly think he's tough, and Peter Walker, Energy Secretary at the time of privatisation and now a non-executive director of the company, was a little taken aback at the performance of his appointee.
I certainly remember I think the only question he asked me was, "Are you a troublemaker?" And I said, "No, I'm not a troublemaker, but if trouble comes my way, I certainly will not back away. Oh, he said, that's all right then. And I think this is hearsay, I don't know, but some of his colleagues have told me that this was the biggest mistake he'd ever made in his life. And he may well have done.
What do you think they expected?
I believe they thought that the regulator wouldn't give them any trouble, that they actually genuinely believed that they were doing everything absolutely splendidly, and there was no need for change.
Sir James felt otherwise. He has frequent contact with customers. He claims their stories remind him that there's plenty of room for improvement in the consumer's lot.
And they gave me a debtor's meter to pay. The last payment was due about 7 weeks ago. And when I got in, my young son had been in when they come and emptied the meter. And when I read the slip, I thought, this is crazy, because none of this is added up.
3 of the 4 people Sir James met on this occasion had complaints about British Gas.
I thought these cases had all come to an end.
Meeting disgruntled consumers convinced Sir James that the nothing-will-change attitude of British Gas was inadequate, particularly when dealing with poorer customers, and particularly when it came to disconnections.
We put forward a proposal whereby debt and disconnection could be virtually eliminated. And British Gas was dismissive. They said that there is no problem, that what you're putting forward will not work in any event, and it would be very difficult, etc.
And it was. It took British Gas 2 years to agree to his proposals. In those 2 years, disconnections grew from 37,000 a year before privatisation to a high of 62,000 in 1988. After the deal, they fell rapidly, and last year they were just under 20,000. But all this was achieved at a cost. His relationship with British Gas has been frosty.
I think there's a cultural divide between British Gas and off-gas. British Gas didn't believe that competition would happen. They didn't think that debt and disconnection should be dealt with in a different way. These things were firmly held views by British Gas, part of their culture. We've had our ups and downs. I think we've been in quite a steep downer recently. I rather hope that things have now stabilised and that we perhaps can get on to a much better footing. I do hope so.
We too came up against British Gas culture. We had arranged an interview to discuss, among other things, their relationship with the regulator. 2 days beforehand, they pulled out, citing as a reason an investigation by the Monopolies and Mergers Commission, an investigation which has, in fact, been going on for 2 months.
It may be understandable that Sir James's relationship with British Gas is strained, but it does seem odd that the size of our gas bill should depend so entirely on that relationship, and on the degree to which he will fight on our behalf. Others may not be so bold.
It really shouldn't just be up to the particular personality or interests of the individual regulators, however good or bad they may be. It is very interesting that in all of these industries, it's one person in each industry who is given the task in the legislation of doing the regulation, although they've got an office and staff. That's pretty unique.
It may be too early to tell whether regulation as practiced now will work long term, but it may not have to. As time goes on, we are told, competition will replace regulation, and we, the consumers, will reap the reward.
Customers always benefit from competition. It's always far better that they have alternative choices. If they don't like what one firm provides, they can go to another. And there's no amount of consumer pressure you can put upon a firm that is equal to that ability to vote with their feet and go elsewhere. Yes, they always benefit.
But there are some unlikely opponents of this view. Ian Pow, Director General of the Gas Consumer Council, might be expected to champion the cause of consumer choice, but he thinks there are definite risks to the introduction of competition into the gas market. He's worried that competition will cause British Gas to lose revenue, and that could have a serious effect on consumers.
The worst case is where the introduction of competition actually leads to increased prices for consumers and reduced, in the longer term, a reduction on money spent on research and development, investigation of energy efficiency measures, that sort of thing which is very much in the public interest to maintain.
And you genuinely believe that could happen?
I see a risk, and I think the MMC and government have got to be extremely careful that they don't introduce competition too quickly without taking those factors into account.
The public service ideal at the very heart of the utilities is also, it seems, at risk from the introduction of competition. And its place in the future of utility provision has not, thinks George Yarrow, been fully addressed.
Do we want these industries to be there providing to domestic consumers, and I stress domestic consumers, a service at roughly comparable prices, no matter where the people are located? Or does one simply stand back and leave things to the market? In which case, you will find that prices will vary from person to person. They'll be different 5 miles out of town from in town. Some people will not get supply because it's too costly to provide those supplies, and so on.
For Michael and Pauline Matthews, the decision has already been taken. Because of their isolated location, they continue to live in the dark ages. And if unregulated competition takes off, then there's a risk, if you are not a profitable customer, that you could end up likewise.